Hi, author Denise Hollingsworth, and this channel is all about helping to give you tools to give you the fullest life that you want. So I'm sharing lots of good information and also sharing great friends and people who have some knowledge for you as well as for me. So today I am not going to use up our time with chatter. We have Dr. Terrence Roberts with us. And Dr. Roberts was one of the Little Rock Nine. And maybe you don't know who the Little Rock Nine were, but they were some courageous kids that changed the course of U.S. history. So I'm honored to have Dr. Terrence Roberts with us. And this will have to be a two-part series because we are talking about forgiveness and healing after trauma, particularly Dr. Terrence Roberts' trauma, but we can't do that until we get some background. There's so much going on in our country today, but a lot of the events, a lot of the efforts are really built upon the foundation set by the activists back in the 50s and the 60s. So I'm bringing history to you today. Again, Dr. Terrence Roberts, and I'm about to clue him in, and we're going to start at the beginning. I am fascinated, and hopefully you are too. Welcome, Dr. Roberts.
Well,
How
thank
are
you.
you?
I'm doing very well, thanks.
Great. Well, my viewers are excited to see you and excited that you're here. Please, if you have any questions for Dr. Roberts, enter them in the comment section and we'll see if we can get around to them. Dr. Roberts, can I just start with a real fundamental question? What are you doing today? We're going to go backwards in a second, but what have you been doing in your adult life?
Well, at the moment, I am retired from all active employment. With some rare exceptions, I still maintain an adjunct faculty position at the Museum of Tolerance here in Southern California. But beyond that, I have my own consulting firm and I work with business and industry, educational institutions around issues of fair play in the workplace, racial discrimination, communication, and mental health in general. I'm
Mhm.
a retired clinical psychologist by profession, and I continue to do work in that arena of various and sundry kinds. Tomorrow,
Mhm.
I'm participating in a health conference for women, but they
Mhm.
have what's called a man cave. It's an adjunct to the conference. And in the distant past, husbands would drop their wives off and then they would go play cards together. So the organizers thought they should corral that group and get them interested in health as well. So I'll
Mhm.
be talking to men about mental health issues.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Well, we know that life has been quite a journey for you. I imagine it started out in Little Rock, Arkansas, just kind of a normal kid's life. And then at some point, you were tapped to change American history. Can you just start with what that conversation was about? Did it start with the teenagers saying we're about to challenge systemic racism, or was it the administration at your junior high school? Who was it? Who was it that came up with this idea?
Basically, it was the school board in Little Rock. After the Brown decision, the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954, the US Supreme Court ruled in that case that discrimination in public education was no longer constitutionally. This was a sea change in the law of the land. Prior to that time, the law of the land said that we would have separate but equal facilities. This changed everything. I was excited in 1954 as a 13-year-old to hear that. Wasn't quite sure what might happen as a result.
Ah.
But as it turns out, the school board decided to get involved. It took them a while. So it was in 1957 that they planned to use one high school, formerly all white, and invite black kids to participate in this experiment. We all volunteered. We all volunteered. It was a school assembly at the two schools for black kids, one middle school, one high school. And probably collectively, we were about 150 volunteers. That didn't last very long, however. We had to go home and inform our parents that we had volunteered, which was not welcome news in most households. So those
Why wouldn't that
volunteers,
be welcome news? Break it down.
well, because the law of the land had been so oppressive to that point. This meant that people had to change their entire way of thinking about things. And it was scary, to be honest with
Mm,
you, for a lot of parents,
mm,
because they thought not only would we be killed, but they might be killed as well.
okay.
See, law and order uh, did not actually apply in terms of black-white interactions. Black people
Mm,
could be killed with impunity, which
mm,
hasn't changed much, by the way, but it was certainly true at that point. And so it took
mm,
a set of courageous parents to say yes. 10 sets of parents said yes. We
mhm,
were, for a brief moment, the Little Rock 10. It only lasted a few days because the father of one child worked for a white employer. That employer told him, if you continue, you may as well not come back to work. So, fearing that his livelihood would be lost, he pulled his child out. That left 9 of us.
mhm. Okay, a question here. You said it started with the school board. So the school board was all white, wasn't it?
Well, yes, they were. Uh, but for some odd reason, and this is historically true, often there are people in positions, and in this case, a group of people, most likely of the same or similar mindsets, who agreed that this was a good thing to do. Unusual for that region, of course.
Mm-hmm. Huh. All right. And so they pushed the idea out to the students at school and let the students decide, and then later on work it out with their parents at home.
Yes.
Hmm.
Although it was not something that was entirely the brainchild of the school board, because Black people, Black organizations have been putting pressure on the school board for years to make this happen, even before the law changed. So you
Mm-hmm.
might say it was a combination of activities
Mm-hmm.
and people who were working at various and sundry levels in society. And it all came together
Mm-hmm.
in September of 57.
Uh-huh. But did you know, as you were registering for classes at Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas, that this could be very dangerous? I mean, did you have a real conscious idea of how dangerous this could be for you?
In a way, yes, although I had made a miscalculation. I thought that those who were most uh, eager to keep us out would come and show themselves and actually give voice to their opposition and then go home or back to work or wherever they were. But no, they came prepared to fight. And that's when it dawned on me that our lives really were in danger.
Hmm. So
You
when they
can't
came
live in
to fight
that part of
you,
the country.
uh-huh.
Anybody who happened to be black was
Oh,
fair game.
okay.
But us in particular, yes, because
Mm-hmm.
we represented the threat, the 9 of us, because we were saying that we had the law on our side and we wanted to do this. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
the folk on the other side were actually incredulous. They thought, how could this be? We were accused of having been imported from New York or Chicago or someplace like that. They
Some
couldn't believe
wild
that
place.
some wild place that they couldn't believe that black people in Little Rock would have the nerve to challenge a system that had been in place for centuries.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. How did the 9 of you, let's say before classes even started, how did the 9 of you create a bond so that you could encourage each other?
Well, we didn't actually before
Oh.
we started school. That all came together as a consequence of our being there in the same situation. And
Mm-hmm.
it's true that we did form a very tight bond because we were on our own. Nobody else was there. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we had the Army, I should say this, since nobody was there. In fact, without the US Army, this whole thing would not have worked.
Yes, I want to get to that. I understand it was the 101st Airborne. Eisenhower sent them to your high school. But before we get there, I want to ask you about the day that you were getting dressed for the first day at school. What was
Well,
on your mind? What were you prepared for? Just what was that morning like for you? Did you walk to school? Did someone drop you off? Were your parents with you?
well, the very first day, I got ready for school like I would for any first day of school, and I was always an eager student. I enjoyed school and I wanted to be there on time, so I was up early. We didn't have too much discussion at home because I think already in the air there were these warning signs that things might not go exactly like we may have wanted them to go. We had seen on television that mobs were assembling around the school. The governor had called out the National Guard. In his words, the Guard was there to keep the peace. We didn't know yet at the time they were there to keep us out. So that was the sort of background noise, if you will. But I walked, it was only 6 blocks away. So I walked up, and as I walked up, I could hear the sound of the mob. They were very, very vocal about their opposition to this whole idea. And that's when it occurred to me that this is more serious than I thought.
And so you're walking from your home, you're approaching the mob, right? You
Yes.
hear them, and then what? I mean, how do you actually enter the school if there's a mob there?
Well, we didn't enter the school. That's the whole point. We were kept out. The guard was
Oh, okay,
stationed around the school, and they formed a shoulder to shoulder barrier.
okay,
We could
okay, I got
not
it.
penetrate it. Now, they would step aside to let white students through.
Okay,
And a
okay,
couple of times I made the mistake of getting in line with the white students, only to be stopped once I got there.
okay.
Well, after two such things, I figured it out. Okay, so their real job is to keep us out.
Mm-hmm.
Now, before I arrived, one of the other students had arrived, Elizabeth Eckford, and most people have seen that photo of her walking the 2 block in front of the school, the entire 2 blocks, seeking a way to get in. And she too was rebuffed. I didn't even know she was there at the time. The mob was so thick, I couldn't see her until a news reporter told me that she was sitting on a bus bench. So I
Mm-hmm.
made my way over there. Now, this is all within the mob. I mean, they're around, swirling around, just yelling and screaming. So it's very scary. And yet I walked over and said to her, "Look, I live close. Why don't you walk home with me?" And she said, "No, because if I go home with you, I still have to get to my house." And she needed to ride a bus. So she stayed there on the bus bench and waited for a bus. And she was able to get on that bus later and go home. Meanwhile, I just walked away. And my dad had come up to meet me, and we walked home together. That was day one.
Okay, so
Day,
day one, no school for you.
our next day was about 3 weeks later. It took a long time. A lot of wrangling between the president and the governor of Arkansas, trying to figure out what to do. The governor utterly opposed to any such idea. The
Now, who was the
president's
governor? Who was your governor?
Orville Faubus.
Mm-hmm.
Orville Faubus was the governor. He was a new governor. And interestingly enough, when you look at his background, he did not grow up in a household that was, fervently anti-black. His
Mm-hmm.
grandfather would be considered a liberal. In fact, his grandfather's name wound up on the House Un-American Activities list. He was considered to be so left-leaning. But in
Mm-hmm.
any case, I think Faubus figured out if he were going to be governor of Arkansas, he had to spout a segregationist line. And he
Yes,
became very good at it. He became
yes.
very adept at it.
Mm-hmm.
So he's fighting with the president Eisenhower at that time. They're going back and forth, and we're out of school this whole time. Finally, Faubus said, "Okay," he said to Eisenhower, "Okay, have it your way." So he removed the National Guard. And here's where we made one of our big mistakes of that whole episode. The 9 of us agreed to go to school under the protection of the Little Rock police force. That was a bad move. because these
Hmm.
policemen were in no wise 100% dedicated to the task of keeping us safe. The mob broke through their lines once we got inside. We actually got inside school. The mob broke through the lines and they were coming in to kill us. The assistant police chief, a man by the name of Gene Smith, stepped in and said, "Oh no, we'll do something about this." So he rounded all of us up and we met down in the basement garage of the school. Fortunately, there was such a thing as a basement garage. So the policeman could drive in and
Mhm.
pick us up and then speed out. And the orders from Assistant Chief Smith was to use the accelerator only. Don't think of, and off we went, and we got home safely. This was one of the scariest days of that entire year because we
Because
knew
they
we
were coming, you knew they were entering the school for the purpose of killing the 9 teenagers.
exactly, exactly.
And these were
So
adults. These weren't other kids. These were adults.
these were adults, and some of them were policemen. A lot of the policemen ripped off their badges and joined the mob that day.
Mm, mm, mm. So, can I say that by day two, first day and second day, 3 weeks later, that you all were traumatized by then? I mean, it sounds like day one would have been enough trauma for me. I mean, how are you all feeling emotionally?
Well, I think we were all frightened, no question about it. But I think there was something else going on. All 9 of us had lived under those oppressive legal sanctions for so long. We were just tired of it. We were absolutely tired of it. And even though we knew that we could possibly be killed, even as 15, 16-year-old kids, we said, okay, that may be, but we're going to do it anyway. And so we had this idea. And another thing that was going on too, probably because we were that young, we had that sense of immortality. Nothing could really happen to us.
Mm.
So I think our understanding about being killed was somewhat embryonic. Uh, we didn't want to be killed, certainly,
No,
but
no.
we felt like we had to put ourselves out there and nothing was going to happen.
Right. I mean, you just sound like you were all so mature for high school. Usually high schoolers are, sort of focusing on the prom, maybe their grades, AP courses, going to college, you know, what boy do I like? What girl do I like? I mean, just sort of,
Well,
everyday teenager thing.
as a black teenager in Little Rock, you simply didn't have that kind of luxury. I mean, you could do that if you wanted to live in sort of a self-created bubble. But if you had any awareness of what was going on around you in terms of the politics and the economy and the social settings of that day, you had to feel trapped. You had to feel like you were never going to break out of this on your own. You had to do something. And here was an opportunity. I think more than anything, the 9 of us saw it as an opportunity to make a dent in this centuries old project of keeping Black people under the heel of white people. We weren't
Mm,
happy about that. Not at
no.
all.
No. And I know that although this was 1957, I know that there were other things, that happened before then. You've already mentioned Brown versus Board of Education. So certainly there were signs that there were many activists that were pushing for change in the legal arena, economically, with, bus boycotts, all of that. So I am presuming that as sort of woke teenagers, you all were paying attention to what had already been happening to challenge systemic racism. Am I right?
Oh, yeah, we had absolutely a fund of information. In our schools, in the all Black schools we attended, we got an early introduction to the true history of this country. What was then called Negro history was a required course in our high school.
Oh.
So we were not at all uninformed. We understood. As I said before, we weren't happy about it, but we knew the truth about what was going on. And I think deep inside each one of us, perhaps for various and sundry reasons, we wanted it to end. We wanted it to end yesterday. And so this was our opportunity. This was our time to say to the entire world, we're not taking it anymore.
Hmm. Okay. So, I'm glad to hear that. And certainly we are all grateful for the sacrifice that you all made. But what do you think was so special about the Little Rock Nine that it has made such an indelible impression upon our society? Because there were many groups that were challenging the status quo. So what was so unique about your experience?
I don't think it was the uniqueness of our experience. I think it was a confluence of several things. One, television. Television was just being made available to the average homeowner in 1956. 1955, 56, people were being introduced to television. In 1957, this was one of the first times that cameras focused on us in Little Rock were beamed all over the world, really. So we had that
Mm-hmm.
going. We had the whole phenomenon of young kids being involved on the point. And while that had happened in some small ways outside Little Rock, this was the first time this had happened in conjunction with the televised episodes that were happening. And then we had this states' rights versus federal rights contest between the president and the governor. That was going on. So all these things are going on simultaneously, drawing in people who were interested in all of it in one way or another. And I think that combination of things led to us becoming sort of a focal point for the entire civil rights movement for a while. For a while, we were front page news throughout the country until sometime I think in October when the Russians launched Sputnik, sent a spaceship up,
Mm-hmm.
and that bumped us off the front page.
But still, you were getting coverage. You just weren't on the front page anymore.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So it was not forgotten about. Um, so tell me, this name, Little Rock Nine. Where did that come from? You didn't name yourself that. How did that come about?
No, that was the brainchild of some reporter, and I don't even know which one. But once it was reported that way, it sort of caught fire and
Uh
took
huh.
off on its own.
Uh huh. Because you all weren't sensationalizing it in that way, where you had a name, a theme, and all of that. You were just focused on the mission of
Right,
integrating the
right.
school.
Those things you mentioned, those are very recent developments. No, we didn't have that.
Right, exactly. Okay, so now let's go back to Eisenhower and the 101st Airborne. So day two, you've been swept away by police cars, from the basement garage. Now, what's next?
Well, shortly after that, Eisenhower said, okay, this is enough. And he stepped in. He federalized the Arkansas State National Guard to make sure they weren't a problem anymore. Now they're under federal command. And then he brought in the 101st Airborne Division, troops from that unit. These were guys who had made their name in World War II as being one of the toughest units in the Army. And they came in. Now, interestingly enough, it was an integrated unit, but only white soldiers were assigned to Central. Now, the rationale for that being that the black soldiers might be so, triggered by some of the insults that they might shoot somebody, and they didn't want that to happen. And that probably was true because I've talked to some of the members who were in that troop, black men who were in that division stationed there, who said, yeah, that's probably right. Probably best if they left us back at the base camp. But anyway,
Really?
they moved in and they picked us up at Daisy Bates' home. Daisy Bates was the president of the Arkansas State chapter of the NAACP. We gathered there on the day the troops came, and we all piled into an Army station wagon and two Jeeps with sirens roaring through the streets until we got up to Central. And a cordon of soldiers accompanied us up the steps into the school, and two soldiers accompanied each one of us on our daily class routine. They would stand guard outside the door, and as we exited, they would walk with us to the next room. And this went on until the end of the day, and then we left. Now, we had to leave as a group because it was too dangerous to do it otherwise. So the Army would pick us up and take us back to Daisy Bates' home. And that routine lasted probably for the first 3 or 4 weeks. And then the Army was gradually removed, the 101st, but they were replaced by these newly federalized Arkansas State National Guards people. So they became our guardsmen for the rest of the year. Now, people have often asked if they were as diligent about keeping us safe. And from my standpoint, yes, they were. But you might get a different point of view from one of the other members of the nine because we're not of one mind on that. But in my case, I didn't have any extra problems with them. And one thing I found out, if you've ever been in the armed services of any kind, they have this chain of command and orders come down from the top. And if you, as the member at the bottom, say the private or the first line person, if you disobey the orders, there are instant consequences. You could wind up being stripped of your rank or thrown in jail, something very severe. So there was some incentive for these guys to do what they had been told to do.
So did you each have a soldier assigned to you? So,
Yes.
for example, you had to go to the bathroom, you have to go to the cafeteria. I don't know if you were involved in any other activities, but it was someone with you all the time.
Well, up to a point. They couldn't enter any room with us. They would stand guard outside the door. So, yes, they would walk with us to class, walk with us to the cafeteria, to the bathroom, but they couldn't come in. So they would stand outside the door and wait, and then we'd continue wherever we were going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that went on all year.
But you weren't always traveling to the same classes. This was high school.
We
So
didn't
weren't
we
you
didn't
in
have
different
any classes together.
facilities?
None of the nine of us had classes together. There
Okay.
were only nine of us,
Uh-huh.
and we were assigned homerooms based on our class standing, whether we were 10th, 11th, or 12th grade. One senior in our group, 5 juniors, and 3 sophomores. None of our names were similar, so homerooms were assigned alphabetically. So
Okay.
that meant each one of us had a separate homeroom, 9
Mm-hmm.
separate homerooms, and your homeroom dictated your class schedule. So
Oh.
all the people in your homeroom, I was in what's called the RST group, alphabetically. And so all the kids, white kids as well, whose names were either RS or T, were in that same group. We
Mm-hmm.
weren't all in the same homeroom, but we had a similar homeroom. And our
Mm-hmm.
class schedules were dictated by which homeroom we were assigned to. So you might actually think of us as the Little Rock 1 9 times based on that.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. So you said 10th graders, and I guess I was always thinking I was primarily 11th and 12th graders, and it didn't cross my mind that there may have been a 10th grader in there. So they were very young, maybe 15,
Yes, I think the youngest member of our group was 14 at the time.
14. And how did you feel that emotionally it was tougher on that 14-year-old? What was the 14-year-old's name?
Carlotta, Carlotta
Carla.
Walls.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it were tougher on Carlotta because she was young. I think there was something about the entire group of 9. What was that something? Probably had to do with the fact that we were all willing to push for change. Now, this was something unique, uh, for Black people, especially in Little Rock, because there had been no real groundswell among Black people to opt for change. There was a great deal of fear and a great deal of practiced involvement in a system that was very demeaning. My next door neighbor, Black woman, told me that I was a troublemaker. She couldn't understand why I was doing this. And I understood. She was fearful that she would lose her job. There was a
Wow.
real economic interest for her.
Yes.
A Black minister told me this. He said, you have no business up there, which I thought was really weird, especially coming from a minister.
Mm-hmm.
And then he said something else that completely threw me. He said, but since you're already up there, you might as well stay. So I'm not sure what he was saying, honestly.
Uh-huh.
At the time, I thought, well, maybe he's hedging his bets with God, you know, trying to be on eat both sides at once, just in
Right.
case.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yes, I would imagine that if you've lived under those conditions and been so oppressed and been penalized for ever stepping out of line, that essentially that becomes the world that you're comfortable in. That's the world that you can accept, and any deviation from that, you don't know what's awaiting you. And so you
Yeah,
live in
yeah.
that fear.
Sort of like better the devil you know than the one you haven't been introduced to yet.
Mm-hmm.
I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. I tried a lot to figure out what was going on with people, not just the black people in my neighborhood, but also white people at school, because they were a strange bunch. Often people ask me, well, were there any white people at Central who were friendly toward you? I said, you have to realize that in any group of people, you will never, ever find unanimity of thought. People think differently. We're all unique. So, yeah, there were a few people there who thought we probably should have a chance to be there. Problem was, their voice was practically mute because they were afraid.
Yes.
Speaking in those words, some words of friendship would have gotten them killed. So
Uh-huh.
it was quite obvious that not everybody had the same idea, but the majority of them were very definitely opposed.
Mm-hmm. Did the students say anything
Oh, they said a
denigrating
lot.
toward you?
Are you kidding? That was a whole that was a whole vocabulary. Words of denigration toward us.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't
So
shy about it.
give me an example. You're in history class. What might happen?
Well, there's another factor. What happened in class was in large measure accounted for by who the teacher was.
Okay.
If the teacher would tolerate that, then it would go on. If the teacher didn't tolerate it, then it would be stopped. That simple.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them were tolerant. And I think the teachers, like the students, were all operating under this level of fear that if they stepped out of line,
Mm-hmm.
say with the segregationist mindset, they could either lose their jobs or be killed or hurt or something.
Mm-hmm.
I had an English teacher that year who was expressly uh, angry toward me. You could see it on her face when I walked in. Her face was twisted to such a degree, and I knew already what she must be thinking. And then she said it. She confronted me one day. She said, "Why do you want to come to our school? Why don't you go back to your own school?" Just like that, very sharp tongue. And I didn't know what to say to her in response because my first thought was that this woman has a mental health problem. She's thinking that somehow she and I have ownership in these public institutions. Because she's talking about her school and then inferring that I have a school to go to. I just thought she was bats, so I just walked away. Interesting woman altogether, and she represented the ultra extreme.
Mm-hmm.
You think of the teachers as lining up along a continuum. She would be at one extreme, and then at the other extreme would be a person who thought, well, maybe these black kids should have a chance.
Mm-hmm.
Few people at that end, very few at that end,
Right.
but there were
Uh-huh.
some. There were some.
Mhm. They just may have been afraid to express it. So I'm going to give you a hypothetical. Let's say you are in English class, history class, one of those fundamental classes, and you raise your hand to answer a question. Would there be a comment from someplace in the room? Oh, put your hand down. Was it like that level of harassment?
No, no, no. The thing was, and here's a very interesting detail about this whole episode. The nine of us were very good students. We were absolutely into school. I mean, we loved school. And, we had been in a system, in the all black school system, where we were challenged to learn because I think our teachers felt that we needed to be prepared to enter this society and do better than they did. So
Yeah.
they equipped us. We were ready for school. So I think the students picked that up right away. In fact, I think that's what made some of them even angrier than they were in the first place,
Mm.
because they may have thought before we arrived that we were going to be ignorant, unable to cope. And then they found out that we were not. We were on top of the school material. Even though we had been out of school for those 3 weeks and the teachers had refused to give us our assignments, we were still ready because we
Mm.
found ways to
Mhm.
get the work done.
Yes, yes.
So that was never an issue. The only issue was, again, like I said, the teacher, him or herself, if they tolerated nonsense, then it wouldn't be so much as vocalized stuff as physical stuff. People
Mhm.
throwing things at me.
Mhm.
I was
Mhm.
in this English teacher's class. Kids felt free to throw things at me, even while the teacher was at her desk. And she would always say, "Well, I didn't see it."
Okay. Yeah. Well, did you ever have a teacher stand up and protect you,
Oh yeah,
discipline another student, chastise another student as a result of something that was said or done to you?
sure. My algebra teacher was one such person. She said, when I arrived, when I finally got to class, she told the students that she would not tolerate any harassment. Anything done to me would not be tolerated. So that was a safe zone. There were a few safe zones at school. There was her class, and then there was the library. The librarian was a woman who didn't take that kind of nonsense either.
Hmm.
But
All
there were few such places, of
right.
refuge.
And to your knowledge, those people were never penalized for being supportive or, just trying to maintain control, really.
So far as I know, I'm
Hmm.
pretty sure they were probably socially ostracized, but I think, given the fact that they were willing to do what they did, that
Hmm.
was not high on their list of concerns.
Right, right. Uh-huh. Okay, and I would imagine that any type of other activity at the school that you all did not participate in that. ROTC, I don't know, the art club.
Oh
I
no,
would imagine those things
We
were
were
all off
forbidden
limits.
to do any of that. In fact, we had to sign an affidavit to that effect. And had we not signed the affidavits, we wouldn't have been able to come to school.
Okay,
So
let's
no extracurricular stuff.
yeah, so let's just sit with that for a minute. You had to sign an affidavit saying that your presence there would be just limited to your basic coursework and you would not get involved in athletics or any type of extracurricular activity. Is that what you're telling me?
Absolutely.
And what was the origin of that? Was that the school board? Was that a compromise that the governor and the president worked out? How did that come about?
Well, it was presented to us by the school principal as a safety measure. Ergo, we can't guarantee your safety if you're involved in these activities. So, to make sure you're out of danger, we will
Mhm.
have to limit that participation to zero. Now, that was the manifest content. The
Yes.
latent content, we all picked it up. They didn't want us having associations with the white students in these activities.
Hmm. Hmm.
Anything that might have led to an opportunity for us to build relationships, that was verboten.
Yeah.
Never will this happen. Not on my watch. And we got
Yes.
that. We understood that.
Yes. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. You all were very clear what your goals were.
Oh yeah,
Very, yeah, very insightful. And I imagine that focus, that determination, the clear imperative that you had was was what kept you maybe within some safe emotional boundaries as well.
well, I can't speak for the other eight, but I think in my case, I probably came into the world with some sort of DNA component that allowed me to maintain some sort of equilibrium, emotional, psychological equilibrium, no matter the circumstance. I don't know. I take no credit for it. I just happen to have it. And I figured that out pretty early in life.
Hmm.
I could be involved in situations, and rather than allow fear or fright or heightened emotion to get in the way, I would always try and think my way through it. Think, what are the elements here? What's going on? What
Mm.
part am I playing, and how do I extricate myself from it? So that I don't
Right.
get hurt. Uh,
Uh-huh.
to me, it was sort of a life skill.
Yes.
So
Yes.
one way that I handled that when I got to Central, rather than be upset by a lot of the name calling and that sort of stuff, well, I went in already knowing that when other people speak, whatever they're saying, has nothing to do with me. It's a
Yes.
message about them, tells me who they
Yes.
are. So if people
Yes.
were constantly telling me who they were, okay, I'm okay with that. I don't have to get involved in that. It's not a message meant for me. I
Right.
use
Uh-huh.
that I use that now when I talk to groups of young people, and I say, consider this: if you're walking down the school corridor and somebody behind you yells out, "Hey, stupid," and you turn around, what have you done? In my estimate, you've just signed a social contract that stupid applies to you. Now, if you know you're not stupid, why are you turning around? It's a simple thing, just like that.
Yes. Yes. I
And
love
and
it.
and for some kids, that's very new. That's very new information. Hadn't even
Yes.
thought of it. But
Yes.
I tell you, it's
I'm
actually
gonna.
a time saver. You don't have to get caught up in stuff. I was talking to one young girl once, and she looked like she'd had a really bad time. Her face was all distorted. And I said, "What happened?" This was in Chicago, one of the Chicago public schools, and she said to me, "A woman at the bus stop mean mugged me today." A mean mugged, and I thought, "What is that? I never heard that term." "What do you mean mean mugged?" I said to her. She said, "Well, she made a face." I said, "What did it have to do with you?" She said, "Well, she made it at me." I said, "Well, you happen to be in her vicinity, but how do you know it was for you?" she, she was convinced. She was convinced the woman had made this mean mug toward her. And maybe she was right. But I'm still thinking, from your point of view, as a young child, why are you getting involved in her stuff?
Right. Why are you getting involved in her stuff? I think we can all use that, young people as well as older people too. I'm gonna think on that one. I'm gonna jot that down because so often we do respond, to things that really have little to do with us, and it's really just someone else expressing their own insecurities and or whatever mental health issues, whatever their issue is, they're directing it toward us, but we can repel it, send it right back to them because it really has nothing to do with us.
You know,
I like that.
that goes back to one of the ways that I figured this stuff out. My mom helped me a lot. She told me a
Oh,
lot of things. But one
mm,
of the things she told me was, she says, "Terry, there are millions of people out there in the world who hate you. You've never met them. They've never met you, but they hate you." I said, "Really?"
mm,
She said, "Yeah, that's the truth." And she said, "That's how it's always going to be. Nothing you can do about it. But
no,
you better know it." I said, "Okay." So, stuff
yeah,
like that. I had
yeah,
been, I'd been a little sponge in my young years picking this stuff up.
yes,
And
yes. Well, Dr. Roberts, you know that my theme, I mentioned it to you already. My theme is around forgiveness and healing, and we really haven't started that conversation with you, and we're going to do that in part two. I just thought this information that around the beginnings of the Little Rock Nine, your mission, and what your daily experience was would be really informative to our next conversation around forgiveness and healing. So we will be continuing this conversation, as you know, tomorrow. And I will make sure I inform all the viewers. I'll put it on Facebook. And for right now, I'm going to sign off. And again, thank you to the viewers. Thank you for the support. Share this. This will be loaded onto YouTube tonight. So feel free to share it. And Dr. Roberts, we're going to pick this up tomorrow. So I thank you again. And you have a very good night.
you too. Take care. I'll see you.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye bye.